In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to make this really fun recycled Victorian boot stocking. In this particular project, we're actually going to be recycling. I'm using an old sweater of mine to make this portion of the stocking up here, and then using felt in order to create the little boot down here with a button detail. I also sew on a loop at the top, so you can hang it up if you wish. So it's a really fun and festive project for you to make during the holidays. So let's get started. To make the Victorian boot stocking, you're going to need the following items. You're going to need a sweater that we're going to recycle. You need felt, and this is to make the Victorian boot. So I have one color to be the main boot and then a contrasting color to be the spat. You need pins and needles, fabric glue, embroidery floss, and matching sewing thread. I have here 5 1/2-inch buttons. These are the flat buttons. Pattern pieces, which you can get on our website. Scissors, sewing gauge, and fabric marker. So now we're going to go over our pattern pieces and what we need to cut out of our fabric. So here we have the fabric and our pattern pieces for making the Victorian boot. And I'm actually using wool felt. You can use craft felt if you wish. Wool felt is a little bit more expensive, but it's a little better quality. For the Victorian boot, I need to cut 2 of these. So out of this fabric, you're going to need about 1/4 to 1/3 of a yard. For the boot spat, you can actually work with a scrap. I would say to be safe, you would need about a 9x12 rectangle of this, and you're also going to cut out 2 of this. So 2 of this one out of this, and 2 of this one out of your contrasting felt. So after we get that cut out, we're going to work on putting our boot together. After I've cut out all my pieces, I'm going to take my boot pieces and I'm going to lay them so they're going in opposite directions. So I have the toes meeting in the middle, and this is so when we put them together and stitch them together, they're both going to be going in the same direction. So I'm going to take my little contrasting piece here and I'm going to line it up. And you see I've already done it here, and once it's lined up, I'm then going to pin this cream color to the black, because what we're going to do is we're going to do a running stitch all the way around here in order to attach the spat to the boot. So I'm going to go ahead and pin it, and then we'll get closer so I can show you how to do the running stitch. You're going to cut a piece of embroidery floss in order to do this running stitch, and if you look at the floss, you'll notice it's made up of 6 little individual strands. I'm actually using only 3 of those strands, and I have it on my needle, and I'm going to come up from underneath onto, well, I'm going through both layers, the black and the cream, but coming up on the cream side, about 1/8 of an inch away from this edge right here, and I'm going to go back down about 1/4 of an inch from where I came up. So my stitches are going to be about 1/4 of an inch in width. And you don't have to measure them. I'm just eyeballing it and trying to make sure that my stitching all looks the same. And then I'm going to come up about 1/4 of an inch away from that and then go back down the same length. So I'm going to do this around the whole perimeter of the spat, so it's all stitched down to the boot. And it'll also work as a decorative stitch. So once you're done with this, and you're going to do it for both boots, we'll work on putting on the buttons. This is what the boots look like so far. So now I'm going to be working on the boot in which the toe is facing towards the left, and I'm going to be placing my 1/2-inch buttons down this side of the spat, and they're going to be about 1 inch apart, where you can lay them as you want to and use as many buttons as you want. It's entirely up to you. I'm using 5 1/2-inch buttons, and they're about 1 inch apart. Just make sure you don't start too high, because there's going to be a 1/2-inch seam allowance, and we don't want that button to get in the way. So something like that. So you'll see it's about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of the spat. Once I lay my buttons down and I like how they're set up, I'm going to remove a button one at a time and use my fabric marker to mark that spot. That way I can take off the buttons and I won't lose the position that I had them in that I liked. And we're going to get a little closer so I can show you how to sew on the individual button. What you're going to do is position your button where you would like it. And I'm doing a flat button, so there's a choice between the 2-hole and the 4-hole button. Mine just has 2 holes. So if you have the 4-hole, you're going to go through 2 sets of buttons and then go through the other 2 sets. I'm going to go up through one of the holes from underneath and then go through the other one. And then go back up through my first hole, and you're going to do this about 4 or 5 times until you feel the button is pretty secure. And you're going to do this for all of your buttons that are laid out on the spat. So let me just go through one more time here. Alright, so after I feel my button is secured, I'm going to go through it a few more times. If I have another set of buttons here and here, then I would just start going back and forth through those holes. So that's how easy it is to just attach a button. So once I've done this enough times, I'm just going to flip it over to the back and tie a knot and finish it off, and then move on to my next set of buttons. Once you have your buttons all sewn on, what you're going to do is you're going to take your other boot and you're going to flip it so now they're going to be right side together. I'm going to pin the edges so they match up and sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance from here all along this, and I'm going to stop right here. Then I'm going to start again about right here, and I'm going to finish sewing to the top. This area is going to stay open because that's where we're going to put our stocking to. So just so I remember where I'm going to start and stop, I'm going to use a pair of pins. And I'm going to do X's like this. So maybe about right here. And you'll see why we do this. This is to leave an opening so I can turn the whole thing right side out. So again, I'm going to pin along here and sew. Here, stop, this stays open, start again, stop, this stays open up here. So whatever you have to do in order to remember that. I'm just going to finish pinning and then go to my machine so I can stitch it. When doing your seam allowance, you're going to do a regular width stitch. Don't forget to back stitch on both the beginning and end of your stitching. And it's a little curvy, so you want to take it slow and be careful. When you get to a corner like the end of my boot, right at the heel here, I'm going to put my needle down, lift my foot, and then pivot the fabric and continue on. So yeah, the trick is just going at a pace where you're comfortable and not running over your pins. Just another one. After I finish stitching the side of my boot, I'm going to clip these little notches into all the curved areas. You don't have to do it for the areas that you did not stitch. And then for the bottom where you have the heel, you're going to clip off these corners. This just makes it lie a little bit flatter once you turn it right side out. And if you want, you can actually trim off some of the seam allowance. Just be sure not to cut into your stitches. So I've already done this side. I'm going to go ahead and finish this side, and then we're going to work on cutting our sweater for the stocking part. So now we're going to move on to working with our sweater. So here's one sleeve. Now the end of the sleeve, this is going to be the top of the stocking. So the boot is going to be attached at this end like this. So you need to decide then how long do you want your stocking to be. So if I want mine here, technically I'm going to cut in this area. But if I want just the blue showing, I'm actually going to cut a 1/2 inch into this red section, this red and blue section, because I need to include my 1/2 inch seam allowance. So you're going to cut a 1/2 inch more than what you think you need. So once you do it, just do a ruler and kind of mark it with a marker, something like that, and then just cut straight across. Next, I cut a strip of felt, which is going to help support my sweater stocking that's attached to the top of my boot here. And how I get this size is it's 1.5 this way, and you can make it wider if you want, but I just picked 1.5. And then for the length, I took the measurement between the seams right here, and then I doubled it and added a 1/2 inch for seam allowance. So it's going to be a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but it's going to be a 1/4 here, a 1/4 here, so that's a 1/2. So this is going to be a total of 9 inches by 1.5. Once you have this strip, you're just going to fold it in half, long-wise, and then I'm going to pin here and stitch my 1/4 inch seam allowance. So here's my loop, which I just stitched the ends at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then I just flipped it so my seam is on the inside of the loop. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to slip it into the end of my sleeve. And this is the part that I cut, not the finished end of the sleeve. So I'm going to slip it in like this, most of the way. So by the time I'm done, the edge, the cut edge of the sweater should be about a 1/4 inch away from the edge of my black felt here. I'm not doing it edge to edge, just a little bit. Once it's in there and it's looking pretty even all around, I'm then going to take my fabric glue and I'm going to come right up between them and I'm going to stick a bunch of glue right in the middle of the 2 layers and then allow it to dry. You don't want glue spilling out everywhere, but you want enough of it so it can prevent our sweater from fraying anymore, because mine definitely likes to fray, and it's held onto our felt. But you don't want so much that you're going to goop up your sewing machine when we stitch this at our 1/2 inch seam allowance. So pretty much right here on the edge, not too far into the sweater, just on the edge here. So now we're going to get ready to sew our sleeve right here to our boot. So what I'm going to do is, here is the finished sleeve side. So this is the wrist area, and this is the part where I just glued my little black band to. I'm going to take the sleeve and I'm going to stick it through this opening in the boot with the finished side first. So my yellow side is going to go in first, come down the middle of the boot, and then come out here. So when I'm finished, this top edge should line up with this top edge here, and this is what we're going to pin and then stitch our 1/2 inch seam allowance. So here we have a view of the top of the boot, and I already stuck the sleeve inside there and pinned it. So you see I have my black band, then I have my shoe, and the sweater is sandwiched in between the 2 layers. I put my pins on the inside here because it'd be easier for when I'm stitching. When I have this at my sewing machine to stitch the 1/2 inch seam allowance, I'm going to have it faced up like this, so I'm stitching along the inside and then just rotating my boot, instead of trying to move all this out of the way and stitch on the outside. It's just a little bit easier to pull this back, stitch along here, and then just rotate it. So I'm going to go ahead and take it to my sewing machine so I can do that, and then we get to the fun part of trying to flip it right side out. So here you can see I have my foot and my needle on the inside of my boot, and I'm just going to go around the whole top of the boot until it's all stitched down using a regular stitch, and it's at the 1/2 inch mark. After you finish stitching the top, you're going to want to turn this whole thing right side out. And you can pull onto your sleeve to help you do that. Just don't pull so hard that you pop out your stitches that are up here. You're just going to very carefully ease the whole thing until it's all right side out. So once we've turned everything right side out, we're then going to have to deal with our opening that's left. So the best way to do it is you're going to fold under a 1/2 inch on each side. So I have my top layer and I have my bottom layer. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to fold it a 1/2 inch, and if it's easier for you, you can pin it. And then on the bottom, I'm going to do the same thing. Once you have them both, all you can do is put them together and pin it. So you're just going to kind of form the rest of the shape of the shoe, and then we're going to slip stitch it close. So we're going to get a bit closer so we can show you how we do the slip stitch. So now I'm going to slip stitch my hole closed, and I know it's hard to see because I have black and I have black thread here, but basically what we have is we have this side and we have that side. So this is one side of the fold, here's the other side, the opposite side of the hole, and a pin is holding the hole closed. So I'm going to take my needle and thread, I'm going to go on just one side, tuck my knot in there. So now it's coming out of the left side. I'm going to grab a little bit of the fold on the right side and then a little bit of fold on the left side. So I'm just going back and forth between the two sides, and that's what's going to close up my hole. Because as I pull my thread, it's going to pull the two sides closer together. And because I'm using black thread on black, hopefully it won't be that noticeable. So once I get to the very end of my hole, I'm going to tie a knot, and then I'm done with closing up my hole and we can move on to the next part. To create the loop at the top of my stocking, I'm going to cut out another little piece of felt, and this is 1 inch by 4 inches. On one side, I'm going to put fabric glue all over the top, then carefully place it with glue side down on one part of my sweater that's still left. And mine's multicolor, so I'm just putting over the yellow because I want a yellow loop. Once it is dried for a couple of minutes, then I'm going to take my scissors and cut around the strip, and I would end up with something like this. So now I'm going to attach this loop to the top of my stocking. So at the top of my stocking, I'm now going to fold it over. You can fold it over as much as you want. I'm just going to do a couple of inches, and then I'm going to take my strip now, fold it in half, and I'm going to pin it to one side. So I would say about 1/4 or 1/2 of an inch is underneath my stocking, and the rest of it is sticking out of the top. So I'm going to pin this, and then I'm going to get my sewing thread and needle so I can tack my loop onto the top of my stocking. I'm going to tack on my loop by using the running stitch. So I have some needle and thread again, and I'm going to start by going up between the 2 layers of the loop, so my knot's going to be hidden in between there, like that. And then I'm going to go through both sets of loops and through my stocking because I want it attached to my stocking now. So I'm just going to flip it to this side, pull out in the back. Make sure it's not caught on the other parts of my stocking. There we go. And then I'm going to go through the back, up through the loop. So I just want to make sure it gets in the right spot here. And I'm going to go back and forth a few times. So I'm going to go from one end back to the other end and maybe back one more time because I want it to be nice and tight. Santa's got to put a lot of stuff in there, and I want to make sure that my stocking's going to stay together. So now I'm going to go back through to the other side like that. So now when I go back through again, I'm going to go in the other direction and then one more time, and then I will tie a knot and we'll be done with our stocking. And here we have our Victorian boot stocking. We have our recycled sweater at the top, and then our Victorian boot, which is made out of the felt and has the button detail. And the loop is now attached to the top, so it's ready to be placed right above the fireplace and to be filled with lots of goodies.